Physiology. I'm Dr. Kurt Escobar, and I am here again with Amanda Finn. Amanda, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Yeah, just enjoying kind of a sunny, rainy day. That's how it is right now in the South.
Well, there's a lot of metaphorical rainy days going on right now in our field, in our area, and the larger context of things. And that's actually what we're going to talk about. You know, so we are 3 months into the new presidency. And for those of you, kind of paying attention, there's a lot going on, including, and this is the reason for our conversation today, but including things that relate to science, things that relate to research, things that relate to the university and academia, and things that relate to health, including, for Amanda and myself, things that affect our particular communities. However, there are things that are going on right now that are going to affect people far beyond our communities and people on the whole at the national stage, local stage, national stage, and to be honest, like the global stage. And so today we're going to be talking about what sort of field specific, area specific developments, as we'll say, have been occurring, are occurring, and how those are relevant to students in the field in the area, researchers in the field in the area, faculty members, and then I think people that are just interested in health and science overall. So, Amanda, happy to talk to you again. I know you are very in tune with things that are going on, and also being active in the ways that you can be. So I'm looking forward to this conversation because there's a lot to discuss, and I think a lot that people probably in our area, including students, especially undergrad students, perhaps may not fully appreciate. So I'm looking forward to highlighting and focusing on some of those things.
Yeah, this is, I think, a really good. I think that we're two individuals that, like you mentioned, have been affected in our science careers, in our research, present and future, and what we're trying to do professionally. But also, like you mentioned, our Latino communities have been affected by this administration. And I don't really have a lot of opportunities to talk to academics that are also Latino. So I think that that's one thing that is important for us to cover too, is like the intersectionality of being in academia and like, oh my God, I want to study public health or nutrition in the future. And there's some cuts that are going on that'll affect my ability to do that. But then on this, like at the same time, I'm like calling my family members being like, you guys got your papers? And like me thinking like, do I need to have my papers? Cause like I get profiled sometimes as like being Latina and I'm just like, yo, like I don't know how to feel about that right now.
Yeah.
Like pride, but also like, oh, like what
Right.
if that's ICE?
Yeah.
Thinking
Yeah.
that. So yeah, it's like I do have time where I can talk to people in the academic world about just like the issues related to censorship or like cuts to our research funding, but then I don't get to talk about like the other personal stuff too.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, like you say, that there are people out there that are being affected on multiple fronts, right? And I think too, for individuals that are not in research, not in science, not at the university, like the things that are occurring at the university in the research labs, from the funding aspect, from a censorship aspect, like the things that we study relate to health. And so when you have cuts on health related research, well, then that is going to affect at some point, health outcomes, right? Because the research is what drives application and policy, right? And so the things that are occurring right now, like it might seem, abstract or far away. No, these things at some point right, are going to have real world impacts. And what it looks like now is they're going to be negative ones. So, and I think to start off with this conversation is something that, just to like really reiterate and make the point that these things affect our field and our area, and the populations that we would be working with as practitioners, is what happened with Dr. Kevin Hall. For those that don't know, Kevin Hall is, a top tier legend in obesity, metabolic health research. The both of us in our time in academia and learning about things have read his papers, for many years, right? And he was at the NIH. Well, as we know, there's new leadership in many of these agencies, including at the NIH. And just this last week, I believe, and I was put onto it because I saw you post about it, Dr. Hall left the NIH for very particular concerning reasons that I think speak to the larger sort of trend, the larger actions of censorship, because data did not really fit what the new leadership and the new health secretary, we'll get into that dude, really want to present, right? So I know you are familiar with this, and including the data and the paper that was in question, or at least partly in question. So why don't you tell us a little bit of that, and yeah, tell us what happened there.
Yeah, so I've been familiar with Dr. Kevin Hall's research, primarily with his research about energy balance model of obesity. And so that's one thing that like really sparked a lot of interest in nutrition and probably in like kinesiology and other fields where they're interested in like, well, what causes obesity? What causes weight gain? So Kevin Hall was one of the individuals that really did good studies to understand that energy intake, or that having like an imbalance in, calories out does play a really important role in weight gain over time. And he did really good controlled studies in metabolic wards. So what that means is that people would come in and for a period of a couple weeks to like a month, so not a super long time, but it's expensive to feed people and keep them housed like all day. So they would do really controlled studies and they would track everything, like people's poop, like everything, to really understand the mechanisms behind obesity. And so it's interesting because I think that the way that he approaches things will be like he's skeptical of something, so then he wants to test it. And I think that that's really good. So his most recent projects have been focused on ultra processed foods. And so he admits he's a skeptic that ultra processed foods would cause obesity. And so what he has been doing is building on research to understand in humans whether or not ultra processed foods cause obesity independent of like the calorie content, the carbs, proteins, fats. So basically he's like, if we have a really processed meal and it's like a, I don't know, a ready to microwave or ready to eat sandwich, and then you have like a natural sandwich that like, you made from a farm, if they're the same calories, would somebody eat more of the ultra processed one? And then why? And so a landmark study from 2019 was the first data to show in humans that if you match the calories, the fiber, the protein, you match everything in two types of meals for 2 weeks, and one is ultra processed and one is minimally processed, that people will eat 500 more calories per day on the ultra processed diet versus the less processed diet. And so then people would gain weight over time as a result of like being able to eat more of this ultra processed food. And so I'll like pause there and like let us, talk about that study before I get into what his most recent study showed related to ultra processed foods, because that's the study that allegedly the Department of Health and Human Services was censoring. But up to this point, they were all like in agreement with his research. And by they, I
Right.
mean like Trump's leaders and in health departments.
Yeah, his work, like you nicely sort of laid out, is kind of getting at, does ultra processed food by a distinct mechanism, right, other than the energy intake, caloric balance, cause weight gain and obesity, right? And that's super important because there is a thought, right, especially against or towards the sort of maha optimizer, bro, crunchy, health, holistic guru type people, that ultra processed food causes all kinds of problems, including obesity, but in an independent way that is different than other types of food, right? So yeah, his work was important in highlighting. It's like, no, it's still calories, right? It's still the energy intake, but again, like you mentioned, it's maybe not a surprise, but it means something to have like actual scientific empirical data of like, if you're eating M&Ms versus an apple, is way easier to overeat M&Ms than it is for an apple, right? And all of that is like intuitive, right? But it's good to have that data. But the thing that is an issue with a lot of things, I think, is the fact that that gets taken as, oh, these people, the establishment, the scientific hegemony, the scientific establishment, they're pro ultra processed food. You will not find one motherfucker in science, in academia, in nutrition, in dietetics that will say you should eat a lot of ultra processed food. No one will say that. What will they say? Limit. You don't have to necessarily exclude, right? But limit it. And one thing, and I'm sure this will probably get brought up at some point, is what? Yeah, sure, they're not that healthy because they don't have a lot of nutrients, right? Vitamins, minerals, micronutrients, and things like that. They facilitate overconsumption. And then two, the other thing that I think goes over underappreciated is the fact that if you're eating high amounts of ultra processed food, what does that mean? You're not eating more nutritious whole foods that have vitamins and nutrients and micronutrients and things like that. So yeah, like you mentioned, his work, went a long way in terms of elucidating that, but that is still taken as like a pro ultra processed food stance, and therefore it's corrupt science by the corrupted establishment, academia, research, I don't know, big food or whatever, right? And another element, and you'll touch on this, is the other thing that they propose is that it is addictive, right? They are designed to be addictive. Not just, oh, they taste good, I want more, right? But they are designed to be addictive just in the way of like illicit hard drugs. And that leads us to this paper, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect transition. So, this paper, they're trying to build on their previous research and understand, okay, so people were able to eat 500 calories more every day if they're eating ultra processed food versus less processed food, which that's still a big deal. And I think that in that study, they were really trying to match the types of diets. So I know like you gave the example of like an apple versus an M&M, and that's still true, but in their case, they were even being more like, okay, we're going to try to make similar style meals, but have them be like different in processing. That's still hard to accomplish, honestly, but still it's like 500 extra calories a day. Like that adds up a lot with like body fat, body weight. So they're like, okay, one of the things that people often say as a reason for why ultra processed foods are addictive, or they claim that it's addictive, which is a whole like controversial thing, if like food can be addictive, etc. But they're like, it's got to be through dopamine pathways. And so if your brain releases dopamine when you eat ultra processed foods, it might be like a super dopamine response compared to a less processed food, and then that like causes you to want to eat more of it. And I'm not an expert in dopamine and brain stuff, but that's just kind of how the story goes. So they're like, let's
Neither are the
test
people
it.
that talk about it.
I know, I know. So at least like, yeah, it's funny because I'll be like masters and like doing my PhD in nutrition. I'm like, so I'm not an expert on ultra processed foods, but like, then I'm like, whatever. I'm better than a lot of these people that like are lawyers that are like making policies. Anyways,
Yeah.
what they did in this study is they had people across the BMI scale. So they took 50 people and they had them pretty evenly distributed among like normal BMI and the obesity BMI category because they're interested in being able to capture a pretty good range of body weights in people. And what they had them do is they did a PET scan in these people before and after they had an ultra processed milkshake. So the methods for the PET scan are interesting and they're basically gonna figure out like when the brain is having a dopamine response. I won't get into the specific methods, but like they use dopamine receptor antagonists and it's really cool. So it's not directly looking at like dopamine, but it's looking at like whether or not something is binding to a dopamine receptor. And so in the paper, you can read it. And they're basically comparing dopamine responses when people have fasted. So they fasted for like 17 hours and they're staying inside of the NIH metabolism units. So again, it's like that really nice design where they're controlling what they're eating. They're like, the participants are not able to like go out and like drink, you know, the night before the study. They're like controlled. So they have their PET scan and fasting, and then after they have an ultra processed milkshake, they do a PET scan again. And so their hypothesis was that you would see a difference in your dopamine levels when you had a milkshake because, you know, that's probably why people want to have more milkshake or more of like these ultra processed things. And what they found was that there was no difference in their brain dopamine response when they were fasting and when they had the milkshake. And so that goes against the
Hmm.
hypothesis that you would require a dopamine response to be addicted to ultra processed foods. And that was the name of the study. It was something like dopamine responses are highly variable in response to
Yeah.
ultra processed milkshake. So that was published in early March. And Dr. Kevin Hall, who's the senior author of the study, he retired a week ago. So, like in mid April. And we can talk about the reasons he says that led to him retiring.
Yeah. 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 Let's stick a little bit more on the data.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. I mean, I did this for Journal Club yesterday. So,
oh
like,
yeah, you're
it
all
was
about
great
it.
to hear other people's opinions as well.
Yeah. One, it's a super cool, well designed study, and like that's one of his, I would say, trademarks is being able to do these super well controlled, extensive studies, right? But yeah, it's questioning the underlying hypothesis, right? That ultra processed food is addictive via some sort of dopaminergic response, right? And obviously, I'm not a above the neck expert either, but this, as you said, shows that no, there was no dopaminergic response. There was no dopamine response. Now they don't want to say caveat, but they do say that's not to say that these ultra processed foods, or in this case a milkshake, is not quote unquote addictive, right? Or not something that people would consume more of, but it's just not through this mechanism that was proposed or hypothesized, right? Because the changes were below the level of that was detectable by the scan, and also much less than what you would see in actual like illicit drugs. You know what I mean? And then one thing just on the dopamine thing, like this is I'm sure you see this too, but this is one of those buzzwords that is all out there. People obsessing about dopamine. Oh, get real dopamine, not fake dopamine. Oh, I'm gonna increase my dopamine. I'm gonna have a real dopamine hit or whatever. Do this for dopamine. You can't fucking measure dopamine unless you're in a lab. And so this idea, this is something I talk about, and you've heard me talk about it before, but obsessing over these things that you cannot measure is a complete distraction. It's a distraction because you can't tell, is my dopamine higher? You can how do you feel? How about that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How do you feel? Just go off that. Oh, I did this, so it increased my dopamine. And then it becomes like you're gaslighting yourself. I feel better because I got dopamine. No, you feel better because you did something that you wanted to do, right? I talk about this with like autophagy. Oh, I exercise, I'm fasting, I turn on autophagy. I need to turn on autophagy. You can't measure that. Why are you even thinking about that? Just do the thing for the outcome, right? But it turns into this thing of you do the thing for this thing that will lead to the outcome, but then doing the thing becomes the whole thing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like going to therapy. You go to therapy to have some sort of behavioral outcome or whatever, right? But then it's I go to therapy, so I go to therapy and then I feel good, rather than no, you're going for a purpose. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And like what you said about you eat the food, you may have a dopamine response, but like ultimately what matters is if you like it and or like something that's very subjective. So in the study, they further analyzed people into those that had some dopamine response and those that didn't. And they're trying to compare what might be different in the people that had a dopamine response to the milkshake and those that didn't. The only things that were significant and that were different between these two groups was their rating of how pleasant, and that's the way that they studied it. So pleasantness of the milkshake and desire for like more. So they basically were like, oh, the people that had dopamine responses liked the milkshake and wanted more of it, and the people that didn't have a big dopamine response didn't want more of the milkshake. But they looked at like glucose and insulin and other types of variables, and those things weren't different in the participants. It wasn't different by body size or BMI either, because that's another
Right.
idea is like maybe when somebody has obesity, they have a lower dopamine response to food, so then they keep eating more to like get to some level of dopamine, but they didn't find that, at least not with this milkshake, which is another point. My lab was kind of laughing about this where we're like, they one of the limitations in the study is that like how do we know that the participants liked this milkshake? It was not super high in sugar compared to milkshakes that I see when like I go through a drive-through at Taco Bell, and it was like 400 something calories. And I was just like, I feel like people could get dopamine from like eating Chips Ahoy or Oreos or many other things like commercial products. Why didn't they test a commercial product as well? So we could also like critique the study as in like maybe there are foods that would cause a dopamine response, ultra processed and like less processed. Maybe the milkshake wasn't a good stimulus. We don't know.
Right.
But like the way that I'll say allegedly that the government reacted to the study is like, bro, just let them be. Like scientists will
Yeah.
criticize the study for you. If you censor it, it looks really bad. But like,
Yeah.
just shut up, let scientists talk, and we'll like tear this guy we'll tear him to shreds. Like in
Right.
our journal club, you don't gotta censor what he did.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. When you read the study, I'll just say this: if you censor something, it makes it seem like this is like this huge, profound. This changes everything. I don't know, monumental. Data. When in reality, no research study is that. Right? Research is incremental and flawed, right? Like you mentioned, there are limitations, there are shortcomings, and they discuss them in the paper themselves, right? And yeah, like you say, if you put something out there, other researchers, other academics, other people in the field are going to criticize it and highlight the limitations and critique what the conclusions could be and what you can generalize from it and what you can say about it, right? But if you censor it, it makes it look like the thing that they are claiming the government and science does. They literally did the thing of censoring research because it doesn't fit a narrative. They literally did the thing that they are campaigning on.
Yeah. And the thing that I feel like I'm like, look, if I and like I'm not trying to give advice to like, like authoritarians or anything, but I'm like, I would just let them do the study. Who cares? Like, make your policies anyways. But like it seems so childish to me. Like, what? You can't
Yeah.
have a study get published that like only nerds are gonna read. You can't let that happen. Like, seriously? Like, just claim that there's other pathways that cause ultra processed
Yeah.
foods to be addictive. That could be true. And like, I
Right.
totally think it's understandable that people could get addicted to types of foods. That's fine. But this paper just doesn't support that it happens through dopamine.
Yeah.
But just say something else is causing it. Like, if you want to be bad, I'm not, I
Right.
wouldn't
Right.
do
Right.
that.
Yeah.
But like, I'm just like, man, good thing I'm not a bad guy because I'd be too powerful.
That being said, they did censor. Was it what was the specific data? He wasn't allowed to present it at a conference. Was that what it was?
So, related to ultra processed food stuff, he was not able to present at a conference. And this is reported in various news sources. So, like CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, and then Washington Post all had stories on this. And then he also made like a LinkedIn post.
Right.
So, gathering all that and reading through all that, the common things that he claims, and I believe him for the record, but just the things that he claims happened were that he wasn't allowed to speak at a conference. So scientists, when we present at conferences, usually, in my experience, it's like you're not supposed to present things that have been published. You're presenting stuff that
Yeah.
nobody has seen. And so you're giving people like kind of like a early glance at what you're
Yeah.
about to get published. So that would be the time to present is before you publish. So he wasn't able to do that. When the New York Times wanted to do a telephone interview with him and his higher ups, once the Trump administration was in
That's
power,
right.
his higher ups were like, you can't do a telephone interview, but you can answer their questions in writing. So he did it. And then it had to go through like the publicity center or whoever for the press. And then they altered his responses to downplay the study. Now, what they specifically downplayed was the sample size. So the study had 50 people in it. But if you're in this field, you know that 50 people getting PET scans and having all their food provided for them, being very comprehensively like studied in all these different ways, 50 people is large. And on top of that, the primary purpose of the study was to answer this question about dopamine. So they do analysis called power analysis, and they understand like how many people do you need to have the power to answer your question. So like it's really dumb, and not dumb, but like they don't know what they're talking about to say 50 people is a small
Right.
study in this context. But that's
Right.
what they allegedly were like harping on. And then Dr. Hall tried to communicate with the like NIH and the HHS leadership, didn't get a response from them.
When did you first sort of have something that was a red flag or felt like something was amiss?
Yeah, so in 21 years at the NIH, I've never been denied the opportunity to present our science at a scientific conference. And I had the opportunity to do so at the beginning of this month. I had an invitation that I tried to clear through the normal process at the NIH. And it was highlighted that this was a topic of interest to the agency. And so it went up to a higher level at Health and Human Services above the NIH level. And it was denied. And at first I thought, okay, well, this is maybe just because there's a travel pause, and the organizers of the conference invited me to do it online, just a virtual presentation. And then that was denied and no reason was given. And that was the first hint that something might be amiss.
That had not happened to you before. You said in 21 years, it's like that's part of what you're a scientist. You present research. This gets denied,
That's
and then
part
there's
of my job.
Then
Yeah, so this was a paper that was already out the door. It was going to be published when the new administration came in. And we'd actually prepared a press release within the NIH to discuss this paper. And what we were interested in doing was understanding when people consume ultra-processed foods, do they really hijack the brain's reward system in a way that we know addictive drugs do, like drugs like methamphetamine or cocaine. They cause this really large increase in dopamine in the brain. And so we decided to test, does the same thing happen with ultra-processed milkshakes that are really high in fat and sugar? And so we designed this study that took many, many years. It was the largest study of its kind, the most well-controlled. We actually had people admitted to the hospital for several days to control their diet in a way that had never been done before. And we published this result, which was interesting. It seemed that these foods, while they may be addictive in many people, didn't cause the outsized increase in dopamine that many drugs that are highly addictive do. And it really challenged some of the narratives behind how these foods actually work to change your brain chemistry. And so that was the main conclusion of our paper was, yeah, these foods might be addictive in many people, and we really need to understand that better, but it's probably not working in the way that many of us thought it was working in the past. So that paper was due to be published, and it was published. And we had a reporter ask for an interview to discuss the findings of that paper for a piece that she was writing in the New York Times. And that interview was denied. Our press release was also quashed for no reason given. And finally, the reporter at the New York Times asked, what is it? Why can't I have an interview? I've actually interviewed Dr. Hall before. We'd really love his input on this paper. And then she actually received a telephone call from the HHS communications director asking whether or not this was really a piece about RFK Jr., because the paper didn't seem to fully support the preconceived narrative that ultra-processed foods are addictive. And so I was shocked to hear about this. And after that conversation, the reporter was given the ability to ask written questions, to which I responded to those written questions through our press office and gave approval to some slight edits about whether drugs were drugs of abuse or addiction. And then what I saw was fascinating, because the responses that were then sent to the reporter had been edited, trying to downplay the study, saying it was very small when it was actually the largest of its kind, and that the participants had only been in the hospital for 5 days, when this was actually the only study that had that level of control. And it struck me as really concerning, because if people were willing to say, there's a little bit of daylight between our preconceived notions about even how the basic science of food addiction might work and the narrative that was going on, what is it going to be like if they want to start, actually meddling in the research itself? Yeah. That was my concern. And I actually then tried to raise that with the NIH director and RFK Jr. directly.
He also had to withdraw from being an author on a paper that mentioned health disparities. I think the word was like health disparity. Right. So they're like, you can't be on this paper because it says health disparity or health inequity. And he was like, I don't think that I can stay and keep working here. I think that those are the main things that happened. I don't know if I forgot.
He took his name off the author line for that paper. Mm-hmm. So it would be published still.
Yeah, because otherwise they would have had to change what they were saying.
Right.
So I had been working for about a year or more, actually, with various university scientists around the country to prepare a really comprehensive review on what we know about ultra-processed foods in various aspects. And part of the paper was written by a colleague at a university on health equity and how these foods are, being targeted to underprivileged communities and why this is a potential problem. And I put the paper through the usual NIH process of getting approval to have this paper submitted for publication. And it actually went through the process until the very next day, where it was flagged that because of this description of health equity in the paper, that would have to be edited to comply with executive orders, or else I would have to remove myself as an author. Now, I didn't write that section. I wasn't going to censor my colleague, and so I voluntarily removed myself as an author. Again, it's the very first time that's happened to me in 21 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he took an early retirement. This was in his LinkedIn post, which is how I came across this that you shared, that you posted. So decided to take an early retirement rather than trying to. I mean, he made efforts, right, to try to see what the issue was and tried to resolve it, so he can continue to do his work and continue to be there. But to no avail, right? They didn't get back to him. And rather than resigning out of protest, as he put it, and losing out on his health insurance and the health insurance of his family, he's very upfront about that. He took an early retirement, which, this is happening a ton, right? This is happening a ton in every field, in every area, in many different organizations. But it happened in ours. And so like I was saying earlier, this really makes the point of that it is not something that is happening over there to those people in those fields, but it is ubiquitous. It is ubiquitous. And for stupid, malicious reasons. I can go on with more adjectives, but I'll just keep it at those.
Yeah, I also want to add to, like, related to the point that it's not something that is just happening to I don't know, like the fields that are targeted politically, like transgender individuals and DEI. I fully think like that is enough for us to be like very upset for us to fight back. But there's people that feel, and I think that in our field, in my nutrition field, and probably in the exercise field, that we're kind of like, well, that's bad, but okay, well, we'll still be okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a few weeks ago, or whenever this happened, Columbia lost funding, and the diabetes prevention program was canceled or was shut down. So that was the first thing where like I was bringing it up in my meetings with people and just like, hey, diabetes prevention program got shut down. That was probably the first domino to fall in my field, because diabetes prevention program is like a 30-year ongoing study that was looking at how lifestyle could be used to prevent type 2 diabetes. And the data we have from diabetes prevention program, it's like been taught in my undergrad and my grad classes as like proof that you can try to improve your blood sugar and prevent yourself from getting diabetes by doing some weight loss through diet and from exercise. And it had like really long, they were collecting data for a long time to understand how does this impact people as they age. And we are not going to have those answers. And so it's not just something that affects like the, Latino excellence study or whatever. It's also the studies that we can all generally agree from like a bipartisan perspective that it matters to know about diabetes when we age, and we're not able to know that.
Yeah. Just the other day, there was another, I can't remember if it was an executive order or some sort of statement or whatnot. But any university that has DEI programs will not receive federal funding. When the definition of DEI programs is not clear, which either is from ignorance standpoint, from an oversight standpoint, or I think it might be both, intentional, so it's vague, so they can enforce it as they see fit.
Yeah. And Alabama already did that. We already canceled all our DEI before Trump. We're like, we want to get ahead.
Right.
No, but I tell my friends and people that I know in Cali and other places, I'm like, look at Alabama and what happens here. That's what's going to happen to the country. And so I'm right again.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, there's 100 different issues with that rationale or approach. But even from just like a logical standpoint, what is diversity or not liking diversity? What does that have to do with cancer research? What does that have to do with Alzheimer's research? What does that have to do with, pediatric disease research? It's like you want to punish these universities for whatever reasons that you have. We would not think that they are warranted. But who's actually getting punished is the people, us. Like not us, not just us in academia and at the university, but like the population, right? Because this is research on diseases. This is research on disease, and you're going to cut funding for this stated reason. And the consequence of that is less research on diabetes, less research on cancer, less research on children's disease, all of these things. Like, how is that punishment or consequence? Like, how does that make sense?
Yeah, and also something else that I highlight at times in Alabama is that when we're studying like diverse populations, or there's words you could use, you're addressing a health disparity, that includes lots of groups that are the MAGA voters, and that includes people that have disabilities, people that are veterans, people that live in rural areas. So one of my mentors does epidemiological research. And in March, in kind of like the end of March, I checked back in with her on this, but because of all the stuff that was messed up with reviewing studies, she had a longitudinal study that was collecting data in rural areas all over the South and looking at cardiovascular disease outcomes. And she wasn't able to get her study meetings at the appropriate times. So right now, I don't know if it ended up happening, but without having these meetings to reapprove funding, then she would have to close down her study that was supposed to be 5 years, 6 years of collecting data in people in the South for cardiovascular disease. So even if it's like just the fact that the administration is allowing there to be these stalls and pauses in communications and like the stuff that has nothing to do with air quotes DEI, it still is harming a lot of really important research, and it just causes uncertainty. It's like, how is she going to know if she can pay staff at 16 sites all over the country in the summer? Like, she doesn't know. And I would hate to be in a lot of these investigators' positions. And yeah, it just hurts everybody.
Right. Yeah. We talked a little bit before, I'm not receiving federal funding, so, sort of largely not affected in that direct way. But I was part of a grant application that we were going to submit in April. That was a program to encourage, not exclusively, but encourage students from underrepresented backgrounds to participate in aging research. And it was a grant that was, me, exercise physiology, people in, I think, in public health, and I think biology, physiology, like multiple programs, multiple departments, interdisciplinary. And we were preparing to submit this, and then out of nowhere, that grant disappeared off the website. It was an NIH grant. Disappeared off of the website, And it's like, what does this accomplish? Like, you don't want more research. You don't want to promote young researchers in aging when we have an growing aging population. Like, don't you want to facilitate and foster the next generation of aging researchers?
Yeah, the thing that is really messed up also is in some of these, I don't know, statements and orders and so on, they'll say something like, "Oh no, we are not against minority health." So they'll be like, "We're not going to cut like minority health research. We will, however, cut training and any support mechanisms for individuals that are classified as minority groups."
Right.
So it's like, yeah, we're not going to cut, they say, right? Like, we're not going to cut Black maternal mortality studies, but we were just not going to like support mechanisms for Black individuals to be trained as scientists or medical doctors or whatever. And I was talking in my meeting yesterday, like, people's health in minority groups, for example, Black women, it is much, their health outcomes are much better when they're being treated by Black individuals. And the same is probably true if you have like trans individuals that are doing research or that are practicing in medicine. That's probably helping on trans individuals' health outcomes. And there's a lot of data on this. Well, I guess I can't say a lot, but you know what? There's data on this.
There's data.
And to try to be like, yeah, we're okay with studying minorities as long as it's white people doing it. Now, that's not what they say, but that's essentially what is going to happen if you're not supporting training, mentorship, fellowships. And those grants are being cut. So, like the training grants from the NIH, like you were saying, there's grants like that that got cut at my university. And the studies that have been cut at my university that aren't related to training, that are like research studies, have been related to COVID and have been related to transgender studies and things related to like hormones and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't really understand what the actual outcome of cutting things like that or prohibiting things like that, how they actually, one, have a direct impact now, either in practice or at the university or in labs or whatever the case is with students. But then also, like, again, how that affects things in the real world. And, you know, I think you kind of alluded to this, but I think some people kind of thought they were optimistic, they were hopeful that we would be safe, right? That kind of goes, that's kind of a larger point that we're kind of seeing now. There's an acronym. I'm sure you've heard of this acronym when it relates to that. FAFO, FAFO. Yeah. Yeah. It's when you think you'd be good and it happened to someone else. It would make other people suffer. They would be negatively affected, but then it happens to you. That is what is being called fuck around and find out. And there are people finding out, including, you know, in research and academia and in health, you know.
Latinos for Trump? Oh, we're talking about academics. Oh, okay. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the disciplines that were like, no, we don't talk about DEI, so we're gonna be good. And it's like, no, dude, your ultra processed food study that's like the least woke thing ever is like getting censored. Like, I'm like, come on. But I could have seen that coming. I don't know. Like, I'm just like, I don't trust what they say at all. But also, I come from a conservative background. And so I think that, like, I can hear the dog whistles that other, like, more liberal people in academia, not more liberal now, but, like, that were raised more liberal, are just like, no, the government wouldn't do that. Or like conservatives, yeah, they say that they want to ban abortion, but like, don't they know people would die? And I'm like, yes, they know people would die. And they just think that they have to like bless them and that it's all good. Like, and I feel like there's another intersection of like being Latina in academia, but also like being formally raised like very conservative, where I'm just like, I feel crazy. Like, I'm like hearing people talk and they're like, well, no, like the government's not going to do that because blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yes, they will.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you've been or you are part of a community where you were subjected to the system not always benefiting you and sort of being either marginalized or targeted by it, like you're not surprised when you're not surprised when things like when shit like this happens. It's like, what do you all think? We all knew. We all knew. But
Yeah, and also like students being deported. Well, not even fully deported, but like disappeared to facilities in states where they know the judicial system is going to be like work against them as much as possible. And like Louisiana, for example, that
right.
that is another thing that like we already knew this could happen to people for being like Latino or immigrant or like Muslim, and it's not only those students that are affected anymore. And it's also not just going to be U.S. Or not U.S. It's not going to be just be international students, but that's how they'll start. And they start with like, oh, well, they were being pro-Hamas, and then they go, oh, well, they weren't actually involved in a protest, but we just don't like the country that they're from, maybe their security threat. And then they'll be like, oh, well, we can just reserve the right to to get rid of
Right.
people if we want. And I just want people to like recognize those signs much earlier, because when there's public backlash, it does sometimes impact what the administration will do. And
Yeah.
we have to use our voices and put pressure on the politicians so that we can stop them much earlier and not wait until it's like, oh, the tenured like American old white guy got deported. And that's the moment when people go like, wait, wait a
Right.
minute.
Right.
Like, no,
Yeah.
like let us like have an uproar way earlier.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of saw that with that Canadian actress, that white woman Canadian actress that got detained for like 2 weeks or something, right? Then it was
That
like,
reminded me of something else,
wait
but
a minute.
continue.
Yeah, then it's like, wait a minute. What is happening?
I truly don't know. I was in there. I met around 200 other women who none of us had a criminal record. Everyone's story was different, a lot of the same. A lot of women, I believe, should not be in there. And what I found is the issue wasn't about getting deported. A lot of women admitted that they overstayed their visas. It's just what the issue that they have is the process of getting out of there. It is next to impossible. There is no communication. You do not have an officer to talk to. You can't contact your lawyers or your friends or your family. I was transferred twice in 2 weeks, which is an awful experience. There were girls in there who had been transferred 8 times in a couple weeks. So the whole system just felt super rigged to keep us in there.
Because you write, this is an interesting part of the article. You say companies like CoreCivic and GEO Group receive government funding based on the number of people they detain, which is why they lobby for stricter immigration policies. It's a lucrative business. CoreCivic made over $560 million from ICE contracts in a single year. In 2024, GEO Group made more than $763 million from ICE contracts. Do you believe that you were kept in there because you were a moneymaker?
Yes, I do. I believe that all the women in there are kept in there as long as possible, transferred around, because it's a business and they make money off of us. That's the only explanation that I could come up with, because I said from day one I would pay for my ticket to go home. The amount of wasted resources that I witnessed in there, the inhumane conditions, they did everything they can to cut costs. I was given one plastic spoon and one styrofoam cup to last the stay. It was when you start putting the pieces together, that is what I felt. I met a girl in there that was there for 10 months. 10 months in those conditions. And I was there for 2 weeks. I'm Canadian. I have a Canadian passport. I had media, friends, family, lawyers, everyone using all of their resources to get me out. And it still took me 12 days. So can you possibly imagine what the other girls in there who don't have my resources, who don't have my privilege, are going through?
Right? When there are countless others that, let's just say, they don't have that complexion, and not from a country like that, there's countless people that are like that, right?
Por favor, que esto se haga viral. Esto está pasando ya mismo en el centro de detención Crom en Miami, Florida. Estamos prácticamente secuestrados. Hay personas que llevan más de 30 días y no han sido procesadas. Por favor, que esto se haga viral, ayúdenos, marquen la Comisión Nacional de Derechos Humanos, marquen por favor a las televisoras del Estado. Esto no es una broma, esto es en serio, por favor, ayúdenos. Es el CROM de Miami, Florida. Por favor, ayúdenos. Habemos muchos mexicanos aquí sufriendo discriminación. Hermanos venezolanos, hermanos guatemaltecos, ayúdenos por favor. No nos permiten hablar no nos permiten llamadas telefónicas, no podemos hacer absolutamente nada. Hay gente que está enferma, no nos dan atención médica. Sabemos que estamos arriesgándonos ahorita, yo mostrando mi cara. Por favor, compartan esto en las redes sociales. Esto no es una broma, esto no es un cuento. No queremos likes, no queremos vistas. Queremos que nos ayuden, por favor. Somos ahorita en este momento 1,300 personas en el centro de detención de ICE. Por favor, ayúdenos.
And just to like, I don't want to say make a disclaimer, or just make the point of like, oh, we're just talking about politics now, you and I, right? And we're just whatever.
So
what does that have to do? Yeah, right. Yeah. So, right, what does that have to do with physiology or health or research or whatever? Well, one, it has everything to do, because we're seeing things affect research and science and health outcomes for not just certain populations, but it's going to affect everyone, the entire general population. But then two, it's not just like, oh, we're Hispanic, we're Latinos or Latinas. So like, we're talking about, oh, because we just care about our people. It's like, no. Like, we have students that are going to be, or potentially be, directly affected by this. Like I mentioned to you, we've had a number of students have their visas revoked for no apparent reason. We have immigrant students. We have documentation, both, right? We have dreamers. We have DACA students, right? And so it's not just we're talking politics and making a political statement. It's like, yes, but also like it's not just an abstract political conversation, right? These are our students, or these are our community members. You know what I mean? But especially at the university campus, these are our students, right? That could be subject to these things, including just being disappeared off the street and in plain clothed agents, right? Thrown in the back of the van and just held, right? Ask questions later.
And it's so horrible to think about. And we also have videos in some of these cases.
This is the moment Tufts University graduate student Rumeysa Ozturk was arrested and taken into federal custody. Doorbell camera footage obtained by NBC News shows two plainclothes officers approaching the 30-year-old in Somerville outside of Boston. Ozturk at first appears to back away before more agents approach, one eventually taking her phone out of her hand. Officers then take her backpack off, handcuff her, and lead her across the street to a car. An onlooker heard questioning why the officers' faces are covered.
I see some faces here. How do I know this is the police?
Ozturk's lawyer says she was on her way to break Ramadan fast with friends on Tuesday night when she was detained without explanation. She says her client, a Turkish national, was in the U.S. working toward a PhD in child study and human development on a valid F-1 visa, which allows foreign nationals to pursue academics without the intention of immigration. In a statement, the Department of Homeland Security today, writing in part, DHS and ICE investigations found Ozturk engaged in activities in support of Hamas, a foreign terrorist organization that relishes the killing of Americans. Glorifying and supporting terrorists who kill Americans is grounds for visa issuance to be terminated. DHS did not reference specific incidents, but in March of last year, Ozturk co-authored an op-ed for Tufts student newspaper, condemning the university's dismissive nature and condescending tone when responding to calls for the school to acknowledge the Palestinian genocide and divest from companies with direct or indirect ties to Israel. Ozturk's attorney says no charges have been filed to her knowledge and that she's been unable to contact her client. ICE detention records updated today say that Ozturk is now in ICE custody in Basile, Louisiana. Tufts president says the school had no pre-knowledge of this incident and did not share any information with federal authorities prior to the event. Adding, from what we have been told subsequently, the student's visa status has been terminated, and we seek to confirm whether that information is true. The arrest comes on the heels of the high-profile detention of Columbia grad student activist and permanent resident Mahmoud Khalil in New York, spreading fear in the community.
The fact that someone can just be disappeared into the abyss for voicing an idea is absolutely horrifying.
To just see like how these people they don't fight, like they can't make any claims against these individuals, and oftentimes they don't. So one student from Iran he was being detained in Louisiana from University of Alabama, so not my school but one of the other schools in Alabama, Roll Tide, that school. They claim that he's a national security threat, but they have no evidence. They don't say anything. And I know if they had anything against him, like he was in a protest, we did not have pro-Palestine protests, like largely in the state. And so like they can't even make the claims that they're making about other students at like Harvard, Columbia, wherever. And it's making people very angry. So Donald Trump is going to come to some commencement events next week at the University of Alabama. And I'm not going to go protest for my own safety, but I do expect there to be a lot of people protesting because like they've messed with the money, they've messed with the funding for the university. And then now like international students are not safe. And so that has really gotten people angry, even though, yeah, the state voted for Trump mostly. That campus did not vote for Trump. To my knowledge, Kamala Harris won. But what you were bringing up, the Canadian individual that was like detained, that reminded me that I think it was like at the end of February, there was a video that was viral about a woman in Iowa, and she was like tied up and dragged out of a Republican town hall by plainclothes like police or whoever, just these guys. And whoever was at the microphone was like taunting her and being like, you're just a little girl, nobody wants to hear you. So she was like a PhD, I don't know what her role was, but like, so she's like a PhD educated woman that was literally just being like boo or whatever. And that was like enough for her to get dragged out.
The auditorium was full.
Bornfall, who has previously run for a seat in the Idaho House as a Democrat, tried to ask a question during a discussion about reproductive rights. Her friends, Megan Kuntz and Tamara Saenz-Cremelis, tell KTVB legislators would not take the question.
They even used the words "shut up" at one point. And so, yes, she said, is this a lecture or a town hall?
There's an opportunity for you to stand up.
Bornfall was first approached by Sheriff Bob Norris.
My name is Robert Norris. I'm the Sheriff of County. We're asking you to leave on video. Please get up or be escorted out.
Sheriff Norris asked her to leave, then grabbed her.
Eventually, what's going to happen is everything
Please don't touch me. Let's go. Please don't touch me. Please don't touch me.
Let's go. You're gonna be escorted out.
I just happen to have a nice
Okay, I'm asking you to go. You want pepper spray?
Then Norris called in 3 unmarked security officers.
Nobody knew who these people were that were assaulting her and pulling her away.
Who are these guys? Who are these guys? Show your badge! Who are you? Don't touch her.
They pulled her out of her seat.
And she wasn't doing anything threatening. She was sitting in her seat, not doing anything threatening.
And into the hallway while Sheriff Norris filmed. Kuntz and Sines Cremelis say the MC of the event spurred it on.
He called her a little girl multiple times. Also said, your voice is useless or doesn't want to be heard here.
Look at this. This little girl is afraid to leave. She spoke up.
Kuntz and Sines Cremelis, as well as Coeur d'Alene police, say Borenfall was cited. The battery charge stems from allegations that she bit one of the security officers.
In my opinion, that sounds like self-defense.
Kootenai County Republican Central Committee posted on Facebook saying Borenfall was arrested and that she disrupted the town hall and vocally cheered for any DEI initiatives.
It was evident that dissent was
Not being tolerated.
That put me like over the edge. So we were having rallies for like supporting science. And I was kind of like, oh, I don't know if I should speak. Like, I don't like public speaking, whatever. And I saw this video and that like lit a fire under me. And I was like, I have to speak because at least I know I'm not going to get humiliated and dragged like out of a room with nobody doing anything. And so like, shout out to that. 'Cause that like got me like, if I ever doubt myself, like if I should speak, I'm like, no, wait, remember the woman in Iowa. And then I'm just like, oh, I'm not afraid anymore. But she was a white woman. And that's very important because I think like me and my boyfriend watched that video and he was like, this happened to a white woman. And he started like calling his like family and he was like, guys, like this is really bad. Like this is like going too far now. And he's not white. So that was why he was like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like that instance, the Canadian woman and look, and many people from our backgrounds will know this too. But when it starts happening to the lighter complected, then it's like, oh, shit is bad, right? But like, there's a threshold, right, where it's like up until that point, it's like, oh, that's how it is. Oh, that's unfortunate. Oh, what's happening over there? It's happening to them. It's sort of status quo type thing. But when it starts happening to the non diverse population, right? That's when for most people, right, then it's like, oh, something is not right here, which is unfortunate because then it's like we're all on the front lines, right? We're all on the front lines taking all the bullets, but yeah, and that's how it is,
Yeah. And so again, like the story with Dr. Kevin Hall retiring, he's a white man. And so I think that is important. Maybe like I'm not going to like, in every audience like bring that up and be like this cis white man, blah, blah, blah. But like it's just like, look, like, yes, I want a picture of him with his resignation. And that way, like there can be no doubt like how bad it is, because unfortunately for some people, they don't see a problem of like, oh, this like, Indian woman or whoever lost a grant. Who cares that she was probably a diversity hire. And it's like I don't know, it's very important when I'm thinking about like how to be persuasive, like somebody's identity does matter if I'm trying to talk to some individuals. And so it's like this professor, like that is just bringing the point at home extra hard. So if you didn't care about the previous things, like you should care now.
related to the university stuff and students, supposedly, the group that's in power now, supposedly they were for free speech, right? And it was the other side that was cancel culture and against free speech. But now they're the ones detaining, arresting, imprisoning people for their deporting people for their First Amendment free speech.
Yeah, and also like making it so that people in science are not able to communicate things like the sex. So you can't say female, but you can say male in the list of what did they call it? Like banned words. They called them like banned or something. So for NSF, National Science Foundation, if I'm not mistaken,
right,
they have words that would cause them to like look into a study or into a proposal to be like, yeah, we're gonna cancel this one.
Yeah. So if you have any of these words in your grant proposal, it will get flagged for additional scrutiny. And we know what direction that scrutiny would go. Yeah. So at risk, that is a prohibited word. Barrier.
When someone's at risk for diabetes. Boom.
Right. Yeah, I know. At risk. Biologically female, biologically male.
Also, some of these terms are like if you're talking about statistics, you could be like, there's a bias towards the mean, blah, blah, blah. And bias is one of those terms. Same for like diversity. So diversity could be like gut diversity, like the diversity of the microbiome. So it's not just it's not just affecting the people that they want to hurt.
Right.
Because they're obviously thinking, they're like, oh, we just don't want people to study Black and brown people and sexual minorities and all these things. So they're just like, diversity. Yeah, let's write that in. And then it affects tons of other fields that are unrelated to their, their hate.
Yeah, this is just stupid. Clean energy, confirmation bias.
Okay, I don't know some of these acronyms. DEIJ? Diversity, okay. I don't know.
I'm not sure what the J is.
They're going to teach me more woke words by releasing the list.
Right. Disability. Like you said, diversity.
Ethnicity.
What? How do you do a research study and not... Yeah. Females.
Okay, the male wasn't on there, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, shout out Hispanic.
All right, we were on the list. Yeah, male's not on here.
But men who have sex with men, they're like, yeah, look into those. But the other ones, who cares?
Mental health, minorities.
Native American?
I mean, if this is not making known what their actually intention is and what their goal is, like,
and like sex as well is something that you talk about many times just for like the sex of the animals. Yes, it was female mice or male mice.
Yeah.
Some of these too are so specific. It's like sense of belonging. Like I'm like, what? Why?
Yeah, you know what this reminds me of? And I've had this thought too, is like a lot of the people that are in these agencies or administration or whatever now, like they're not actual like experts. Like they don't actually do the things that they're in charge of doing now. Like it's like they did it on TV, they did it on podcasts, they did it on social media, right? They portrayed themselves as someone in this area, someone in this field. And so like when you see these plans and then also the implementation of these things, it's just like, oh, you really don't understand like what this actual work is. You don't actually understand what this actual area is. And like this list is a perfect example of like, you think only these words like are involved in like social science, social justice, woke research. Like that shit is like a bunch of those words, a bunch of those terms are found in hard science, in biology, in physiology, you know? But they don't know that because they're not actually in science. They're not actually doing research, or they're pretending on TV or podcasts or social media.
Yeah, and then even the ones that are like probably have very, very specific context, like I think I said like chest feed is like, okay, so what? Like how many studies are actually getting submitted to the NIH as like to get a grant where they're discussing like chest feeding, because it's not going to be the majority of researchers that want to use those terms. And it's just so like it's like the feeling I get when it's like, I think it was for UPenn that they lost their funding because of they weren't like banning trans athletes. It's like, oh, how many trans athletes do you think there were there? Right. And now they're like, you don't get billions or you don't get like tons of money to do your research and do all this stuff. And it's like, wow, gee, thanks for looking out for like the one trans person and like, you know, protecting us as women. I hate that framing so much. That's like a whole different discussion, but like Protecting Women Act, shut up. Like, no, no.
Right. Yeah, I just, well, an example of someone who is not really an expert or in the area that they are now in charge of is this pendejo, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is now in charge of the Department of Health. Right, he's the health secretary. I think that's the official term. Yeah, but this ties back into what we first started out talking about with Kevin Hall and ultra processed food research, because, you know, I'm sure everyone knows he's got a particular, to use a taboo term, bias. He has a particular bias. And a completely, I'll just say it, it's obvious for anyone that is in science, a completely anti-scientific worldview, so anti-scientific understanding, which I will say, I've had this thought for a while, you know, but there are many people that are in the quote-unquote health space, in the quote-unquote science space, right? Many of them are popular. And during, for example, COVID, some of these people that have huge followings, that their whole thing is empowering people to improve their health and to be healthy and to do healthy things for their disease risk and whatever. But they didn't say a damn thing about, hey, it's probably a good idea to get a COVID vaccine. Not a damn thing. And your whole thing is health. And during the biggest pandemic that we've seen in 100 years, you ain't got shit to say about that, the thing that is the most studied and effective thing to do to prevent the severity and the transmission of COVID. Was it perfect? No. Right? Was the communication perfect? No. Right, so there's criticism there, right? But if you're going to say, oh, you should do fucking hot sauna therapy, you should do deep breathing meditation, you should do cold exposure because it's going to make you healthier and reduce your risk of infection, and like, getting a vaccine is going to be some extremely high number times more effective at improving your risk for that and the severity of if you catch it than doing some fucking cold plunge. Like, that's just a reality. But I'll just say it. Huberman said shit. Atia said shit, right? There are others, but those are the two that I'm most familiar with that I see. And from what I remember, they didn't say anything about that, even though that would be the most effective and practical and easiest thing to have done. And so, just like with that, now, when we have pretty much an attack on science, an attack on research, an attack on public health, an attack on health in general, because all of these things are going to have super detrimental effects on health, and also an anti-scientific, I don't know what the word is, approach, right? None of these fools are saying anything either about that. Not saying anything. When it is as clear as day that these things, many of these things, are going to have tangible detriments now and later on science, research, health. But Huberman, and as far as I know, Atia, have not said a damn word about it. And like, for that, I really don't have a lot of respect.
Yeah, the thing that is annoying is some of them in the health spaces will be like, "Oh, I don't talk about politics." But it's like, well, if science and health become politicized, you're still going to talk about
Yes.
science and health.
Yes.
So then you're going to have to talk about politics. Even if you, like with vaccines, the COVID vaccine became politicized. And vaccines have been politicized, but not, I think in my lifetime, not to the extent that they have been since like 2020. But it sucks. Yeah, maybe you don't want to have to say anything about the current presidential administration in your professional life and in your career. But there comes to a point where it's like, I just hate when people like, obviously they make very like, well, with everything going on, sure, it might be hard to find a job. I'm like, just say because of Trump, you're not going to find a job because thousands of federal workers that are more qualified than you are going to be looking for jobs at the same time you graduate your PhD. Just say it's because of Trump. That would not have happened if you graduated during Biden or during other presidencies. And it's just like, what are you afraid of? But I know that they're afraid of losing an audience and whatever. But when it comes to like regular people that are not going to lose, subscribers, I'm just like, bro, just say it.
Right.
But one thing about the whole, like the focus on what you brought up, something about like individual responsibilities for health. I think we need to expect a lot more of that because they're going to want to brainwash, for lack of a better word, like brainwash people into accepting that there's not going to be public health solutions. There's not going to be so they're not going to fund solutions for the public. They're going to offer subscriptions or services that you have to pay for. So I know I've heard RFK Jr. mention CGMs for some reason, continuous glucose monitors. Now, why would he be bringing up CGMs? It's because he wants to promote that that's the way that you're going to monitor your health. No, you're not. Like, unless you have type 2 diabetes or type 1, you have diabetes, a CGM is not going to tell you anything about your diet personally. There was even in one of Kevin Hall's studies that they actually had no issue with, the 2019 study on ultra-processed foods. They had their participants wear CGMs, and there wasn't a difference in glucose and insulin on the two diets, which is okay because they were like matching the diets and so on. But I'm like, they don't care about the science. And that's why the censorship feels silly too, because I'm like, you don't care about the science. Why bother censoring it? But what I foresee in the future is there will be a lot of like, hey, here's a subscription where you can like be told what to eat. And it's not going to be cheap and it's not going to be scientifically backed. But that's what they're going to go more towards and put it on the individual to be responsible for their health, and probably related to like patriotism as well. I swear, like
Right.
Dr. Oz, I don't know what he does in government. He does something now.
Yeah.
But Dr. Oz, TV doctor, I know he was a doctor formerly, but Dr. Oz was bringing up something about how, oh, Americans aren't fit anymore. Like, they're not fit enough to be in the military, and that's the problem. And I'm like, the problem is that they're not fit enough for the military, really? Like, that's not the introduction you get in any of these talks about, like, obesity and NAFLD and all these other things. No, it's because they can't be drafted. That's why. That's why it's a problem. We have obesity because they can't fight anymore. It's like, dude.
Well, I mean, we're gonna need some soldiers to take Greenland. Yeah, and you know, to the point of the whole thing. Look, I think in principle, and this is what I have heard people say, right? Very obliquely, very vaguely, but things are going to be different, and I think this may provide an opportunity to do some good things related to health and food, and encourage things, and you know, I think this is an opportunity, right? It's going to be different. We're going to have opportunity. That's very naive, and I think that's very cowardice to say, because you just don't want to come out and say it, right? Or you're completely misinformed as well, and you buy that story, right? But you know, the whole thing with the ultra processed food, like, and this is not new, right? This has been a talking point, or like an idea, just like carbohydrates and sugar and insulin cause obesity. Right now, it's ultra processed foods cause obesity, and the idea is no, it's the things that are put in the foods, right? It's the ingredients, it's the processing, it's the things found in our foods, is making it poisonous. And you know, we'll talk about the obesity rates and the chronic disease rates, and it didn't used to be the case, and we have an obesity epidemic, we have a chronic health disease epidemic, and we need to understand why that is. Motherfucker, it's obvious. It is. If you look at the caloric intake over the last 30, 40 years or so, it has just gone up. And is that going to solve completely the chronic disease epidemic and the chronic disease issues? No. But for some reason, it's like the main contributing factor of chronic non-communicable diseases is obesity, right? And you know, the last time we talked, you talked about metabolically healthy obesity, which, you know, so not all obesity presents certain metabolic dysfunctions, although it does increase the risk over time for those things to develop, right? But it's not a secret as to like what is a big contributing factor in the high rates of chronic disease, and it has to do with obesity. And it's not a huge question or mystery of like what causes obesity. It's largely thanks to Dr. Hall's research and others. It is caloric excess, right? Like, it all goes back to calories in versus calories out, energy balance. And so this idea of like, we need to figure out what is going on. It's not a mystery, right? But it seems like they need some sort of like deep state boogeyman to like try to figure out what the problem is. When if we had a lower obesity rate, then the rates of these chronic degenerative diseases would be much, much lower, and we would not see the same numbers that we see now.
Yeah, and also if we if we compare our country to other countries, there's different like environmental factors that contribute to why people might have access to a lot of like nutrient poor foods, fast foods, maybe like the structure of how we have to work and commute and do all these things. Like, it's going to be very complex. So and I haven't seen this for nutrition, but what they've done with like autism right now is they announce like, we have a problem, something about autism, which I'm like, is that really a problem? But anyways, but they'll frame it like, oh, it's so horrible. These kids will not like play baseball. I'm like, same, same. But then they're like, we're gonna find an answer by September. And some of the leadership has like walked it back and been like, well, not literally. What he meant was we'll like assign people to do research on it. But what that is like, we name a problem and define it in a way that scientists do not, like generally define problems in the super black and white way. And then two, they say like, they promise we'll have an answer in a very short time. And so then what they're going to do is discover something that benefits them, whether it's benefiting law firms that are going to sue companies that make drugs, whether it's like promoting businesses that sell CGMs or that sell like, I don't know, nutrition apps and other things. That's what they're doing. And it's not scientific at all. And we have to be wary of that happening in our fields if it hasn't started already, because it's kicking off with autism, and that's really bad. So we can't wait for it to be like, oh, let's just wait and see if they ever try this with nutrition or exercise. They're gonna do it. They're gonna do it.
Right. Yeah. It's trying to find a solution to a problem when we know we already know what it is, instead of manufacturing some sort of fake scientific problem or mystery, right? And this is something that you talk about, and I think your advisor as well, because if we say, obesity comes down to calories in versus calories out, like, yes, metabolically, physiologically, practically speaking, yes, but like you highlight and mention is like the social and the socioeconomic factors that people find themselves in that make it more difficult to be in energy balance, or to eat more healthy foods, or to have access and resources to being more physically active, right? And so like there's two things that I find that are interesting, perhaps not new. Well, they're not new, right? But one is the fact that it's not calories, right? It's the food is poison. They're poisoning our food, right? We're being poisoned by the manufacturers or the food companies or whatever the case is, right? So you have an external force, right, that is causing the problems and that you have to, go up against or whatever, right? But then also, at the same time, it's also absolving personal accountability, right? Because, it's not because, I ate 3 pieces of pizza instead of 1, or whatever the case is, or I went to McDonald's instead of, making dinner at home. And there are a bunch of socioeconomic factors that go into that, right? But it makes it like, it's not my fault. It's because the evil food government agencies, they're poisoning me. They're poisoning us. They're poisoning our kids, right? So it gives you an external locus to direct your ire towards, and then 2, it absolves you of personal responsibility and accountability, and removes your agency. It's like, I can't do anything about it because we're being attacked, right? When in reality, it's kind of like that, but it's just misplaced, right? Because again, like you mentioned, and this is something that I think, especially in our field, in exercise and health promotion, exercise physiology and training and all of that, like this is something that goes overlooked. And I think partly because like we only maybe deal with directly the things that we like have a direct impact on. But it is, yes, energy balance. It is personal choices and decisions, but also at the same time, hyper-focusing on those things absolves appropriate policy, right? It absolves social determinants, or it ignores social determinants. And instead of getting, for example, good government programs to help people from lower socioeconomic populations have access to, say, healthy food, fruits and vegetables, so they don't live in food deserts, right? Or having access to walkable places, or a park to go be physically active, or government programs that say, pay for people's gym memberships, right? Or personal training, or whatever the case is, right? Actual social policy that actually takes, social resources, right? It puts the entire onus on the individual, and it absolves the larger sort of structural systemic policy aspect, which then provides an avenue for these people to come in and buy my CGM, buy this ultra, biohacking protocol, buy this $50 olive oil, buy this detoxing, whatever the case is, buy this biohacking thing, buy this like all of these things that, one, cost money, right? But then two, they don't actually solve like the actual crux of the issue. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that when I think about like what is their incentive going to be with holding the food companies accountable when they're like, oh, they're poisoning our food, whatever. And it's something uniquely American, and European countries don't have this problem, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, so then regulate the food companies. Like make them put a warning, just like with cigarettes. Make them put a warning on the food that this has high calories or it has ultra processed. I honestly don't care. I would be very interested. I'm like, yeah, regulate food companies then, or make it illegal to advertise to children, or make it illegal to provide low nutrient food at the public schools. Like, okay, let's do it then. But they're never like interested in pushing those policies or in enforcing. Like, where's the executive order? Like, hey, kids need to have free food to learn in America. Like Donald J. Trump. Like, let me slip that in, like in between his other executive orders. But I think that the reason is there would be some, like, in a very like zoomed out way, there would be some benefits to trying to have policies that help people, and like economic benefits where maybe if people are able to be healthier, they're not going to be using as much medication, or they're not going to be like going to the hospital as much, and so on. But I think that these individuals that are in charge are interested in the short-term gains. And so they're not trying to think about like big picture, like cost savings, because they'll bring up cost savings when it's convenient. So I think that's the reason people need to like remember, kind of like, not to be like, oh, capitalism, but like you have to remember that's what's motivating these individuals that are in charge of our health now. And that's why I'm like, do not be fooled thinking that they will be looking at policies that are progressive towards helping people.
Yeah, it's I don't know what the level of cognitive dissonance on multiple things is fucking crazy. But also specific to this one, it's like, if you're coming out and you're saying that the food companies are poisoning us and the ingredients and ultra processed, like it's toxic, it's blah, 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 blah. It's like, you understand that then the solution to that is called regulation. But all of them, this crowd, are anti-government regulation. Like, how do you make that work? Square that circle. You know what I mean? Like, it makes zero logical sense.
It's like, they're poisoning us. Put them in jail. Like, lock up Nestle, Nabisco, Coca-Cola. Prove it. Like, put them in jail. Right. And like, and that's the thing where it's like, oh, so are you saying that ultra processed foods are healthy or whatever? And I'm like, no, like, screw them. Like, screw those companies. Yeah. Like, I do not make money from them. I also like sometimes, and I'm probably just like a commie or whatever, but like I'll be thinking about like, would I work for a drug company that sells hormones to people, that like profits off of a hormone that I make for free, insulin. And like, I'll be sitting there thinking about it, and it's like, of course, it would be so great to work for some of these pharmaceutical companies. Like, my life would be set, but I'm here like thinking like, well, what would be like the ethics of like working for companies that profit off of meds? And then it's like, really, you're gonna say that like I'm the corrupt one when I'm trying to like explain to people like, hey, I don't think that RFK Jr. like has our best interests in mind. And it's like, I'm not in this for the money, and so are most of the scientists. I won't say all, but like the majority of scientists, they're not trying to get money. They're just trying to do what's right and use their skills and their knowledge to help people. And so that's where it's just like these attacks against scientists. Like, I'm just like, come on, like, come on.
Yeah. You don't go into science in academia for the money. You know.
Yeah, but call me out if I ever start working for a company that sells insulin. Call me out. You're like, she caved.
Yeah, she caved. Yeah. For the people that might, say and genuinely believe it, like, oh, we have a new leadership, we have a new approach, we have, it's opportunity to study different things or to implement different things. Like, in principle, outside of the context of who that's referring to, like, in principle, that would sound reasonable, right? But I've thought about this, like, okay, fundamentally, what is the concern with this RFK guy? Two things. The first is the set of facts that sort of establish his foundation, like the set of facts that establish his understanding, right? And then, because he's only interested in certain research, certain data, and the rest of it is all corrupted, right? It's all corrupted. It's all poisoned by the academic deep state, right? Of all these evil people in their lab coats and with pipettes, right? So it's the foundational set of facts of which he operates from, or all of them operate from. But then the second thing, and this is the thing that I think causes more concern because it's more expansive, is the epistemology is all fucked up, right? So it's one, the set of facts that establish their understanding, and then two, it's the epistemology of how they apply those sets of facts, right? And how they think about things and how they come to conclusions, because it is not rigorous at all, or in many cases logically consistent, right? It's very skewed, very biased, very predetermined.
Yeah. And another thing that I think was the warning for me that there would not be, I guess that we wouldn't be protected in academia and in research, is what they were talking about and what they were saying before they were elected, which is that professors are the enemy. And they're talking about academia like it's this system that just brainwashes people. And it was very, I think it's very consistent when you look at like Project 2025 and their goals. And if you believe them and you believe what they say, then it makes sense that they're looking for ways to defund universities by any means possible. That includes research. And so when like we talk about like they're not only unscientific, but they have these goals that is like, we want to make it so that there aren't places that people's kids can go to learn. And hey, if those places happen to study cancer and diabetes and all these things, we'll find ways to like privatize that, and we'll make it work in the long term. it can't happen at these places because we fundamentally want to burn those to the ground. And that's the issue if you're in science and you don't get political, or you're not political and you're like, well, I just don't want to learn about these things, is like, at least like pay attention when they're talking about you or talking about your field, and then be like, oh shit, like they hate us. And me studying something that they might have had or that their grandma died of or something is irrelevant because they're focused on destroying universities. And hey, maybe we lose some research in the way. But that's another thing that I always want to like focus on when I talk to people that are like, oh, well, I'm hopeful. And like, I'm like, it's more than just being unscientific. It's like their ideology is like making them come to the conclusion that like, we got to get rid of this system, which includes research inside of it.
Yeah. And there's like a pretext of the stated reason for cutting things is like, well, why are we studying? It's a waste, right? Why are we studying this? Like the stupidest thing. They're studying transgender mice. They're making mice transgender, which I think the reality was he confused transgender with transgenic. And it's like, these motherfuckers don't even know what transgenic means, and they think it's transgender.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. Like they
Right.
want to get rid of the funding. So they're probably like, awesome, let's look at like a database and put trans in, and if it says like trans fat, they're gonna be like, yep, yeah, there's a study on trans fats, like and that's wrong. That's woke. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and the pretext or the proposed rationale for that is because it's a waste, right? We shouldn't be studying certain things, and there's this idea that whole like widespread privatize everything. Right. I mean, that's essentially what we're seeing, right? Gut anything public and privatize it, right? The issue with privatizing research in science is the fact that not every study is going to have an immediate return on the investment. Some of it will require lots and lots of money without a guaranteed outcome, without a guaranteed return on the investment. But it may be that years down the road, right, maybe it's another researcher, doing a work, or maybe it's multiple generations of research family, right? Me, my future student, their future student that studied this thing for decades, right? With no tangible economic return on the investment of those funds. But 20 years later, it produces something that has huge impacts on people and health or society, right? And so like the idea behind public research is it's not profit driven, right? It's not predicated on a tangible economic acute return on the research funds, because a lot of things, you don't know where things are going to lead to. You don't know what starts now, decades later, will turn into something that has a big impact. And so if you privatize research, if you privatize science, you are only going to have things that present an acute monetary return on that investment. And therefore, you are going to have a huge loss of research activities on so many things that like you can't possibly imagine what you're not going to be able to study and what you're not going to be able to find out decades from now.
Yeah, and like when you were saying that you could have your studies and your students and then their student studies like not really yield anything, but then eventually in the future like they'll come to the right conclusion or they'll do the right test. It's like, yeah, so many things, like being early in my career, like my first instinct is not the best one because like I have more to learn. So if I'm like, oh, I hypothesized this would happen, and like, you know, maybe after a few years I look back and I'm like, oh, well, that was silly, but like I learned from that. And so I think that it's so important for these ideas to be able to marinate and like get better over time. And you wouldn't be able to do it if you had the same like time frames and motives of what industry has to do, and like what they research is like good in its specific context and things like that. But one example of how like government funded or federally funded research was able to come up with a drug and it didn't seem to make sense at first was Ozempic and like GLP-1 medicines. So people were studying Gila monster venom, and there was a compound inside of the saliva, the venom, and they were isolating it, and it ended up leading to being able to develop weight loss and diabetes medications. But if they like at the first study were like, why are you going to study a lizard? Like that has no relevance to humans. And like the peptide in the animal, we don't have it, but we have a different one. But if they're like, well, we don't even have that one as a human, so like it's extra lame, like it's extra worthless. It's like, no. But it's hard to articulate at every study maybe why it matters. But then in hindsight we can go like, oh, well, this led to this and this led to this. So that's why it's like you're saying, it's important to have that space for people to study things without an immediate return on investment. Right.
Yeah. And I think, you know, maybe to sort of conclude things, you know, we have universities now determining how they're going to navigate with the threats of funding withheld, or the fear of them becoming becoming a target, right, of the administration. You know, some universities have acted more, I would say, courageously than others. You know, Columbia kind of caved, but Harvard, right? They are taking a stand, and I think just recently, a number of other big universities, I think they're calling like the Big Ten, sort of, you know, came together as a group to support each other, not just, you know, symbolically or in spirit, but also I think from a resource standpoint, you know, to fight for the academic integrity and academic freedom that should be held and practiced and protected, you know, for the university. So, you know, I think we're going to see what happens. Because again, you know, like we said at the very beginning, we're only 3 months in. A lot can happen. A lot of bad things can happen, but, you know, hopefully a lot of positive things can happen. And in both directions, like those things compound, right? And so I think it's important to be vocal, right? To bring attention to these things. You know, we kind of talked a little bit. Some people might not want to talk about this, right? Some people might not want to express their feelings on it or put themselves out there, right? You know, I kind of thought about like having this conversation and putting this out there. Not like there's a bunch of people that listen to this, but, you know, it's one of those things like, what are the consequences that might come from it? But I think it's important to be vocal and to make your position known, because, hey, maybe it might encourage someone else to do the same, and that has, again, a compounding effect, you know.
Yeah, I think it's good to end with kind of like maybe our ideas and like calls to action or like thoughts, like you were saying about what we might do to try to make things more positive. Because, yeah, like who knows where we'll be in a year or 3 years. I think that getting comfortable talking to the community and to our elected representatives is what I've been focusing on and trying to do like education and like events with students. But like today, I called my House representative, and she has been very vocal in support of my university and having funding for research. So I called her office, and I always get a little scared because like they actually answer the phone at her office. Shout out. And so like the first time I ever called a few months ago, I did everything wrong. Like I didn't mention my zip code, so they don't know if I'm their constituent. And like I didn't give my message right, and I just like I hung up right away. But now I'm just like, hey, how's it going? Like I'm a constituent, blah blah blah. But like you can talk to them. It's okay. Like you can be a student, you can be a professor, you can be whoever. You can call them and be like, you don't have to have a perfect idea. Just be like, I work at this place, or I work in the city that you represent, and here's why this is really important to me. Are you going to have a town hall? So I asked if my representative is going to have a town hall. It doesn't have one planned, but I was like, well, can we please have one? And they're supposed to. It's their job to like get back to you. And if they don't get back to you, you call them again. And besides talking to somebody that represents you in Congress, you also, in my opinion, need to keep working on community outreach, because in the long term, whenever politicians, and it's different in Alabama versus like other states, but eventually if the politicians decide here that they want to talk bad about my university because they want to kiss up to the Trump administration. And so if they're like, yeah, UAB does like trans mice research and, you know, they're bad, whatever. I want to have had a lot of community outreach at that point with people in senior centers, with kids, with like people in all sorts of different places, so that if they see this on the news, they see this on social media, they're going to kind of be like, I doubt that. Right. Even if they are MAGA, even if they are Republican, to like interact with individuals of the research community in normal ways, in like non-preachy ways, just like doing fun stuff with them. And not have it be like, oh, we're just doing it for elections, or like we're just doing it to tell people to call their rep. No, like just have genuine connections on a regular basis with the community, so that when the government tries to scapegoat us, they'll kind of be like, I don't know. And maybe if they had never talked to a scientist or a UAB person in their life, they might have believed it, gone, oh, I don't know anything about them. Sure, I'll believe that. They do this bad stuff. But to have these positive encounters with us, this is my belief. Like I don't have evidence for it, but I'm just like, that's got to kind of change their mind a little, so that when they hear bad information that's a lie, they'll question it more. And that's what I don't think that there's a way I'll ever know like what the impact is of community outreach. That's what I believe. That's what I believe could be an outcome in the long term.
With that being said, I am not a member of MS-13. I just want to put that out there so it's clear. I'm not I don't know if this tattoo will count or not. I used to be a Bulls fan. I have Bulls apparel. I know. So, yeah.
Yeah, like I have family in El Salvador. I'm like,
I'm hoping the next time that you and I talk, we're not having the podcast in Sicat, in the El Salvadorian prison.
I know I don't think that they take women yet. That's the one thing I'm like, oh, I don't think that they take women. Okay, girl. Like they might put you in Louisiana, but but not El Salvador. But I'll have to call my family to come get me if I go there.
Okay. Well, hey, Amanda, thanks for the time and conversation. You've been someone who I've been following during these times, just to see, stay updated, but then also, seeing actions and what can be done, and speaking up and speaking out. So I appreciate your time, and we'll talk again soon, and hopefully have positive updates and developments. But quién sabe, es lo que es.
Yeah. Solo Dios sabe.
Yep. Y oramos. Oh. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, thanks
Amanda.
you. Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.